Hi, everyone. So in this session, well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Renata Galvão, and I am a partner manager for the London Stock Exchange Group, working in the risk intelligence division. I've been with the company for 8 years. I come from a research background. So before being a partner manager for this organization, I was working as a research analyst and then as a research manager for our specialist research group. I was living in South Africa for the past 11 years. That's where we have our biggest operational footprint of researchers. And then, just recently moved to the US in this exciting position where I work very closely with partners. So just for everyone to be aware, LSEC Risk Intelligence, we have great data and we partner with providers like Lextegrity. So you can see our data in the end-to-end workflow. So together with me today, I have Hamani Shan. She's the head of global compliance operations for Anlan Pharmaceuticals. And then I also have Patrick Murphy. He's the global head of litigation and investigations for Fresenius Medical Care. Thank you so much for being here. So what we're going to talk about right now is data analytics and compliance monitoring. And just to start the session, I'm going to set a scene for you guys. Probably a scary one and way too familiar for all of you. So think about this. You're starting your day, opening your computer in your office, maybe in your basement, like the previous speaker, and you need to make decisions as a compliance officers and decisions to make sure that you safeguard your business. And for that, you need to take into account maybe 300 different data sets. Different policies. You work in one of the most regulated industries in the market right now. You need to think about sanctions. You need to think about OFAC. You need to think about DOJ. I mean, the list goes on. On top of that, you need to think about the different countries that you operate if you are an international organization and all the different policies regionally and globally as well. So where do you start? Well, for all of that, you need data. You need great quality data, different types of data, and most importantly, you need that data in one place so you can reduce the operational burden and just make sure you're covering your bases. And on top of all of that, risk is not static. So one check is not enough. You need to be continuous monitoring the risk to make sure that you detect changes and remain compliant. So you know all of that better than us at LSEC, because you do this every day. And it gives me anxiety just to talk about it. So I can only imagine how it is for you on a daily basis. So to address this topic, I'll be talking with two people that do this on a daily basis and do it very well. So is to hear from you guys and your experience and how you put this into practice. So I'm going to start with you, Hermione, and maybe you can just take us back a little bit as a head of compliance operations and talk a little bit about your organization's journey to provide these data connections and how you went about looking at data in isolation and having that integrated view.
Sure. So just in full transparency, I did a very similar role at my previous company at Alexion. So I had the good fortune and the luxury of having launched the tool the first time. And again, not me, but people who work with me. And then now again at Alnylam. So we really had that benefit and it worked tremendously well at Alexion. And now we've just launched it at Alnylam on March 27th. And we've already found great value in the tool. I'm sure Zach has spoken with Nikki. And I may turn it over to Nikki for more of the technical points. But for us, we are integrating all of our, I'm sorry, my back is to you here. Integrating our spend data from Concur, MediSpend, and SAP. And this involves spend our employees, T&E, spend on third-party vendors, as well as healthcare professionals and healthcare organizations. Without the Lextegrity team, we wouldn't have been able to have all the data connections, and we certainly wouldn't have been able to build at such speed a tool that allows us to efficiently monitor in close to real time. We get, I think Concur and SAP come in the daily feeds. MediSpend may be a little less frequent, but we are efficiently able to target our transactions for monitoring, cull down thousands of transactions into a more manageable amount. And we would not have been able to build this type of capability internally on our own. So I was not there for all the data part, so I may turn it to Nikki if you have a few words, unless, yeah.
I think that one of the important things that we did with Alexion and then Alnylam is just bringing all the data into one place. That's really the key value of that application is you're using these systems, and even within each of these systems, data for one transaction may be on 7 different screens. But the cool thing about the compliance monitoring tool is that it's bringing it into one page. You can view all those details, and it's highlighting areas where further review might be necessary. Yeah, so that's what we did for Alnylam, just bringing it in from those different source systems all into one place.
I think we were upgrading our SAP at the same time, and that I know Lextegrity worked hand in hand with.
Yeah, we started out, and a lot of people are still using ECC, like an older SAP ERP, and we moved into S/4HANA, which most people are also making that move. So we were able to get the data from the newer SAP system as well.
Thank you. I have the same question to you, just to hear about your team at Fresenius Pet, and if you can just talk a little bit about the journey as well to get into a place where you had this robust compliance monitoring system in place.
Sure. Thank you all for having me here. My experience is a little bit different because it was really a government mandated experience. Just to give you all a little bit of context, I come from Fresenius Medical Care. We're the largest care company in the world. We operate in about 120 countries. We have 150,000 employees. And guess how our company was built? All through acquisitions. So what does that mean? Lots of ERP systems, lots of disconnected systems. But here's the problem that we faced. And some of you might be familiar with this since you live this every day. In 2018, when I came to the company, we were wrapping up a major investigation with the Department of Justice and the SEC, where we accepted responsibility for having engaged in Foreign Corrupt Practices Act violations in 18 different countries. We paid fines and penalties of $231 million, and we agreed to a 3-year monitorship. Part of that monitorship was also, which you all eat and breathe this every day, but it's that we needed to have a third-party management system effectively in place. And that's where Lextegrity came in to save the day. And it was funny, last night I was watching the Rangers game. I don't know if any of you are hockey fans, but I was watching the goalie for the Rangers, Igor Shesterski, and I was like, that's Parth Chanda. He's like making these kick saves everywhere, all over the ice. And I said, that's exactly what I need Lextegrity to do. I actually found out about Lextegrity through our monitor, and I found out that not only did she think highly of Lextegrity, it was Wilmer Hale, who some of you might be familiar with, but critically, I needed credibility. And Lextegrity gave me that credibility because I knew they were recognized by the DOJ and the SEC as having a very sound system. So to wrap it up, why they became important to me is, first of all, they were my goalkeeper, all right, because they were coming in to help fix the problems that we had. They were able to somehow connect us with SRS systems, still an ongoing process. Because one thing that's helpful is DOJ doesn't expect you at the end of the monitorship to have a perfect solution. But what they do expect is that you have a pathway to success. And Lextegrity gave us that. So it was hugely helpful to us. It's an ongoing process that I think we'll talk about a little bit more with you today. Thank God that they showed up. They probably saved us at least $50 million on the monitorship.
That's amazing, Patrick. And I think that's a good point, right? Sometimes, especially the business, they will look at the compliance function as a cost to the company, not realizing that is an investment really to make sure that you have those systems in place so you can avoid that breach, you can avoid that fine. So Patrick, just to maybe pick your brain a little bit more on that, can you talk a little bit, I mean, it might sound like a stupid question, but the benefits of going down that route of having that integrated system in place and what that meant to your company as well from a financial standpoint? Because yes, you had to make investment to get out of the Excel spreadsheets, but what are the operational benefits that you got along the way?
Yeah, I think that's the critical term is operational benefits are one thing. Listen, the immediate benefit for us is that we were able to get our monitorship certified in the time frame of the original monitorship. The DOJ and the SEC, they emphasize they want to see sustainability. And that's where operationalizing this is so critical. So what we were able to do is that the monitoring program we have in place now, it's transactional monitoring on a finite level. But through that, we're able to identify where there are fixes needed. Just as one example is double payments. I'm not sure what your all's experience are with double payments, but I've never heard of a vendor that raises his hand and say, hey, you paid me twice. The Lextegrity solution, it helps us to identify them, but then not just talk about them in a vacuum, because then it's useless. It's when you push it into the business and make the business deal with those issues and find out how they're going to fix it, that it really becomes useful.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of more questions, but I want to make sure that the session is interactive. So anyone has any questions as you've been hearing this right now, please do raise your hand. I'll take you back to school a little bit. Just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic so you can ask your questions. So yeah, anytime, please feel free to do that. Hamani, I'm going to come to you now and ask about HCP and HCO. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that type of check and the data sets that and how your team is going about it, making sure that you remain compliant in that space when you're looking at vendors and all of that.
Yeah. So I can talk to two aspects. The transactional monitoring is one, and then we can talk about the background screening that we do as well. So in terms of the transactional monitoring, I think you're exactly right. We just launched the tool, like I said, March 27th. And it really allows us to cull down the thousands of spend transactions into a manageable workload. Right now, we actually enlisted external support also to help us take a first pass at it. What's really great is all these risks, the way we call it down is through risk scoring. So we have all these dozens of potential risk tests. You don't have to use all of them, but that are based on our policies. So if somebody's an expense right below the limit is a higher risk, somebody who submits the expense the hour before it's due or the day before it's due. You can do keyword searches. You can do all sorts of tests. It runs the gamut and it spits out a risk score. The beauty of it is we can adjust the risk score as we need. So when I was at Alexion, this was the first time we had launched it. We got 5,000 hits and we had one person reviewing it. And she did about 1,000 and she said, okay, I don't think this is quite right. Maybe I'm being overly inclusive on these certain tests. So we either drop the tests or change the weighting. You can make them low, moderate, low, medium, or high risk. It's incredible the way you can reconfigure and configure these scores. And then we got to a more manageable subset. Then we had the benefit at Alnylam of knowing what worked. And so it was much quicker the second time around. And I'm happy to benchmark with anyone on our process. But to Pat's point, pushing it into the business. So we just launched it a month or so ago, and we found a trend. You were talking about double payments. For us, it was a lot of people putting meals with HCPs on their personal card. And actually, it started out with one person that the risk was flagged. And it allows us in the tool to dig into it. So we looked at all the expenses for this one person. And then we're like, oh, this is a bigger problem. It's not just this one transaction. But then it allowed us to dig into the rest of the people. And we realized this was a bigger problem than we thought. Don't think it was intentionally malicious or anything, but obviously there's some gaps in our T&E processes and policies. If such a big swath of people are doing this and it's not in line with our policies. It also showed us that perhaps managers are approving expense reports without thinking through the policies because they should have flagged this, but it wasn't just one employee. So we don't use it as a gotcha exercise, right? We use it as a learning tool to see. It helps us really most efficiently target what we need to look at. Then you kind of peel the layers of the onion, and it's really been helpful already in this month. Then on the flip side of it, if there is a particular investigation and we need to dig into all the transactions from a certain person, we're able to do that in the tool rather than going, as Renata said, to several different data sets. So that's one aspect. And then I can turn to the background screening as well, or do you want to reach
please.
that?
Yeah, you can do that.
So we also use LSEG. How do you do LSEG or
LSEG? Yes.
Okay, LSEG. I used to know you by Refinitiv, so if I slip, I'll say Refinitiv.
No, you can still call us that. It's all good.
Okay. That's in our other tools. So in the earlier session, we talked about our review and approval tool, our ACAP tool, where we have engagements with HCPs, and eventually we will have external funding to healthcare organizations also in that tool. What's really nice is in the background, seamlessly and quickly, we run these background checks to ensure the reputation and conduct meets our ethical standards. And we get flags directly within the tool that we need to follow up on, or it comes out clean. The fact that it can be done inside the same tool, flag it in the tool, and so we can process it quickly has been a great benefit to us.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. And I want to also talk a little bit about, you mentioned risk scoring and setting that up. And one question to you, Hamani, also to you, Patrick. How do you go about doing that settings, taking into account the policies, your risk appetite, and also what the regulators might expect to see in Patrick's situation dealing with the DOJ as well? So maybe we can start with you, Pat.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I agree completely with everything you just said. I think when it comes to risk scoring, the one additional point that I would make is how it really, the algorithm and the development of it, it really is an iterative process. So you can't get frustrated if you don't get it effective when you first start. That's something that we've actually continuously worked with Lextegrity on how to define the right parameters for the algorithm. A huge issue for us is high-risk countries. So that automatically gets a higher parameter, and then high-risk transactions. We rely largely on our equipment sales side as opposed to our services side, which is our diagnostic clinics, or excuse me, our dialysis clinics. But on the equipment sales side, we're largely indirect. So that causes some real challenges. So we've worked with Lextegrity to make sure that we're risk scoring in a way that's not just looking at the transaction itself in a vacuum and one size fits all, but in different regions, it's going to be different in how it's going to be applied. And I think that's a super important thing for us, not just to get past DOJ, but it's really to make sure that we're a compliant company. Here are the risks that are presented. Here are the scores that show those risks. I think that's been effective for us by not just trying to do it in isolation, but doing it, working with the vendor to make sure we're getting it right. It's just continuous action.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. The beauty of the risk scores is that Lextegrity has built us the dozens of tests. So once you read the test, you're like, oh yeah, I see what they're getting at here. So you don't have to think about it from scratch. You do want to look at your own policies to see what makes sense. You talk to your investigations team, your finance team, your internal audit team. See, hey, what's bubbling to the surface? What should we trigger higher or lower risk? We look at the corruption perceptions index in terms of geographies. But one of the beauties of the tool, and I apologize if I'm skipping ahead, are these dashboards. So immediately, and I'm not a tech person, but immediately you can see outliers. So, when you're looking at the US speaker program, for example, you can see the 2 HCPs with the dots who've either had the most engagements or the most spend. And, this is not just a compliance issue, right? You're paying, and I'm making up the numbers, but you're paying 200 people to be on your speaker bureau, and yet you've used 2 of these people each, 40 times, and the rest of the people you're using 1 or 2 times. Is that really efficient from a business perspective as well as from a compliance perspective? And then, you look at the number of meals that HCPs are getting or the amount of the meals, and you immediately see the outliers, you see the trending lines. And then when you pick a doctor and you say, okay, this one, sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes there's a very valid explanation of why somebody or particular recipient is an outlier. But then you're immediately right at the bottom of that screen able to dig into every transaction with that HCP or by that employee. So it's all in one place. So it's really changed. It's revolutionized the way we do our monitoring.
No, that's a really good overview. And again, I think it's just that end-to-end solution where you can see the entire risk that your organization might face, and you can make quicker decisions, analyze risk quicker as well. So as you mentioned, you were mentioning the dashboards. I think maybe for the audience benefits, maybe you can explain a little bit about the difference of the dashboard and also the transactional risk scoring that we've been talking a little bit about as well.
Yeah, so I maybe talk a little bit. I'll tell you how we are doing it because previously, and I mentioned this earlier, it's really close to real time. So previously we were ad hoc. One compliance business partner was going into Concur, and then we don't know exactly. It wasn't very consistent what they were looking for, how often they were doing it, how regularly they were doing it. So now we have our global compliance ops team who we set forth all the risk scoring. Again, it's an iterative process. It might not be perfect, but we just launched it and it's already adding value. Then the ultimate goal, but right now we have external support, thank you for helping us, is to have our ops team, when we're fully staffed, take a first pass at all of these high-risk transactions. But we're not on the ground, right? We're the central team, and we don't really know the business as well as the compliance business partners do. So then the second job is for us to pass it off. Now, in very egregious cases, we would pass it off to the investigations team if right off the bat we saw some red flag. But usually we're able to just go to the local compliance business partner and say, hey, here's some transactions that you need to look at, or overall in terms of the dashboard, here's your dashboard that you need to look at every month, every quarter. I think we're deciding to do it every month. We've also set up checklists for each compliance business partner to look at the same exact 10 or 12 things every month using the same dashboards. So we have some consistency and regularity on what they're looking at, because right now, before this, it was kind of just very self-driven what they were looking at. Now we can drive some greater consistency. And often they know the business and they're like, oh, there's an explanation why so much payment is made to this XYZ vendor, and they can just clear it. And they can clear it, by the way, in the tool, right? They can say they referred it to investigations or what other action they took and how they closed it out. Sometimes it's like, okay, no, we need to dig into this a little bit more. So they're on the ground, they can talk to their business partners to get more information. And usually, again, it's not an investigation, but usually we do see a gap in our policies or in our training or maybe in our Concur system. So for example, we've identified some gaps in Concur. So we know Concur actually has some built-in embedded compliance controls that we'd never activated. So now we're going to activate them, and all because of this tool. So the dashboards show you in terms of value, in terms of number of transactions, in terms of risk scores. You can toggle it all sorts of ways. Shows you what you want to see in terms of our spend transactions. Another nice feature is we customize these dashboards. So the business partner for Brazil can only look at Brazil. Somebody more with a regional, well, we don't have that right now. So the person would look country by country, based on their role. And we've also given access to our internal audit teams. As they do their work planning for the next audit, they can see, hey, what should we look at up front? They usually dig in so deep and they find these things, but hopefully we can help them find some of these things up front, and that can help them, further focus their audits. Or the T&E, the finance team, is looking at what sample of expenses they should further audit. And this tool also is helping them identify that sample. So we're using it in all sorts of ways.
That's great. And I think similar question to you, Patrick, in terms of this overview that you're able to have in the tool when it comes to risks, different data sets, and talk a little bit maybe about the concrete wins that your team had on this and the different efficiency gains.
Yeah, let's go to the transaction level. At the transaction level, if there's a red flag that's put up on a serious transaction, depending upon the value of it, it will come immediately to my investigation team. I'm not sure if you do it quite the same way, maybe kind of similar, but then we have a triage process that will evaluate how it should be investigated from there. But then going back to the dashboards, the real value that we see in the dashboards, in addition to everything you said, it's in identifying trends. Let me just give you one. Let's just use it, say it's a hypothetical. But let's say you have a lot of outstanding accounts receivables. And you start identifying what countries do you have those longstanding receivables. Well, why are those longstanding receivables in the same countries that you've pre-identified as high risk? Or why do you have large healthcare spend with healthcare professionals on consulting services in one specific country? By having a monitoring tool in place, you prevent that sort of thing from happening. Because at a transaction level, you can see that the work is or is not being done, or the payments are or not being made. Then more importantly, by going back to the dashboard, which you obviously don't have to do every day, but we use it to identify these trends. That's where it's been most helpful for us.
Thank you. And Pat, in the previous panel, there was a question which I think is brilliant and is one of my favorite questions to ask people that are in the front line putting together those compliance programs, is to just share a little bit about how you build the business case internally just to get those changes described. I know that for you was probably DOJ knocking at the door, but yeah, it would be good just to hear from your experience how, and also like as an advice, right? How do you position this internally in your organization?
I think, Renata, you actually mentioned it at the beginning, is for any of these sorts of programs and processes, and you all know this, you live this every day more than I probably do. You got to show where the value is. So if they're going to be making the spend, why are they making the spend? And how is it going to actually be value add for the business? I think that we have been able to show that. Frankly, these guys aren't here to just take our money. They're here to try to help us define a solution that will be sustainable. So there's a long-term win-win. That's what I think you have to show the business, is that there is a long-term win-win. And the only way you do that, you can talk all day long, but the proof is in the pudding. Unless you show them on the back end that's actually being used and this is actually value add, then it's just not going to happen. And the only way you do that is by going to the data, I think, and showing them how you have actually added value.
Yeah, I touched on this before, but when we at Alexion and now at Alnylam, when we go to the business and we say, look, I think these are some issues we need to look at. This happened mostly at Alexion because we just launched it at Alnylam, but the business leaders would say, oh, hey, can we look at this data a different way? I want to see what my top spenders are in meals, and is there really value add in them giving all these meals? So they are actually started asking us for dashboards, customized dashboards. So we worked with the tool and we introduced it as a compliance tool, but ultimately it became a tool for the business, for themselves to want to use it too. A lot of these business leaders and the local affiliates, they're on the hook for legal and compliance oversight for their market, for example. So we can also explain to them that not only from a business efficiency standpoint, but also from their first, second, third line of defense, this will help them execute their compliance and legal obligations as well.
Thank you. Want to open up for Q&A. And again, this is supposed to be an interactive session. So I think we have a question that way.
So when you were talking about the risk scoring, I'm just interested sort of how customizable it is. So both of your companies, I believe, have had some investigations. So I imagine there's certain countries that maybe don't have a high CPI score, but in the back of your head, anything that comes up in that country is always going to be high risk because of the history, right? So what kind of factors were you able to feed into the algorithm for that risk score aside from CPI? Because looking at other tools, I used to get very frustrated when you felt tied to CPI and that didn't really represent your company's risk profile.
Happy to. I haven't memorized the dozens and dozens of scores, but CPI was one of them. The beauty of it too is you didn't want that test to trump all of the other tests. So you can do weighting of each risk score. So within, and I'm trying to articulate this properly, but you can flag a risk score based on a particular test. So for example, the CPI, high corruption index, but then you can also give that test a weight. So when you combine 15 different tests, it's not the overwhelming one, right? You can lower it and look at other ones. Again, it was trial and error when we did that, but we use things like aged expenses, duplicate expenses, like I mentioned, expenses right under the limit, keyword search. Here's a funny example of how it's iterative. We were, doing keyword searches. Some were obvious, like bribe and kickback, but others were a little less obvious. And we used the word spa, and we found out spa is it's like the acronym for LLC in Italy, I think. So if you know me for a long time, I've said this story now 50 times, so I apologize. But so we are getting all these false positives for Italian transactions because we did a keyword search for spa. So I believe the tool itself can start to learn and eliminate false positives once you've said this is the false positive over and over again. But there's just dozens, I can't even remember all of them. Maybe somebody on the team can tell me more about all of the tests, but it's not just one score that will dictate what you look at. You can be as broad or as narrow as you want. You can adjust it anytime, which is really nice. So does that answer your question?
We're probably a little bit more macro in our approach, I think. Candidly, even without the CPI, which obviously we'll rely on to an extent, but there are certain regions where we just have a lower tolerance. One of the reasons there's greater risk for us is in a really important variable is whether we are direct or indirect. Where we are indirect, that automatically gets escalated. Also, we tend to have increase the algorithm for the risk score where we have a heavy dependence on HCPs. Particularly, that gets escalated where the HCPs are duly employed, which is a really critical one for us. If they have both a public and a private relationship in their work, that's almost always going to get a higher risk score. So that's kind of been the way we've managed it.
And reminded me, and this is going back to our other tool, the compliance approval tool. When we build that, we built in compliance triggers. So if an HCP has already had X number of engagements, I think I mentioned this on the earlier talk, the next time they come in for an engagement, it automatically goes to compliance for review. While we don't have that tool built yet, and our current homegrown tool doesn't have that, we've now, speaking of iterative processes and some findings and from audits and investigations, we decided to build some flags in the monitoring tool. So now we have two ways of looking at it. Once they exceed a certain amount of compensation in HCP, it becomes a strong test to feed into our risk score. But once they exceed an even higher threshold, it becomes an automatic flag. So some of our transactions we look at based on risk scores, but there are some that we automatically look at based on a keyword hit. That was all the SPA stuff. Also, something like if an HCP has exceeded a certain threshold, it would immediately come to the person for review. So we're learning as we go, and then as we have findings from other assurance activities, we feed them into the tool, and the tool's been able to help us.
And actually, can I ask myself a question? Because it occurs to me, one of the things that we haven't talked about with you that I think is probably important is we say we a lot, but who is we? Because at Fresenius, we really struggled with who are the people who are going to review all this stuff that comes in. And where we came out on it is we actually developed a team in India that we have. It's 5 or 6 people now, but they are responsible exclusively for all of our monitoring and the use of the tool. We found that it's been very effective because they've been in place for a little over a year now, but by having specialists in monitoring, it's not just kind of a collateral duty, but this is what they live and breathe. They are getting smarter with it. They're figuring out how to use the system better. They're figuring out how to adjust the algorithm and work with the Lextegrity team in doing that. So I think it's been effective for us.
The transactional tool, we have outside support right now, but in long term, we want our compliance business partners. We want this to be, a core element of their job. So we'll take the first pass again, but we'll eventually farm it out to the compliance business partners to follow up, because again, they may know that right off the bat, this isn't an issue. Secondly, if it is an issue, they have those relationships with the people on the ground. In terms of the LSEG, our Refinitiv tool, we're still, I've seen it done a lot of different ways. So right now in our Lextegrity approval tool, that would come right to compliance because it's HCPs and HCOs, and we have that expertise. But oftentimes you see when you do these background checks on third-party vendors, for example, it runs the gamut of risk areas, right? And sometimes compliance isn't the expert. Sometimes we have to loop in legal. Sometimes we have to loop in procurement. But initially, we're taking the first pass at these due diligence hits, and then we loop in the right expertise areas. So this morning I got one on the train, and it was about getting a license suspended or revoked from the SEC about filings. I was like, okay, this sounds bad, but I'm not the right person to make a judgment call on whether or not this can prevent us from doing business with the vendor. So I passed it off to our legal team for support. So that's how we do it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think that's one of the beauties of having a good data set that aggregates that information is that you can always use the expertise that you have internally in a more efficient way. So they don't have to spend time doing that quick investigation to see the filing. You already have that information. So they can spend their time on really what needs to be escalated and what needs further investigation. reducing, I would imagine, the operational cost as well for you in terms of personnel. So yeah, I would imagine that that's one of the benefits too. Thank you so much, everyone. I hopefully that you found this a good conference where you got insights, practical information from your peers that have developed successful compliance programs. And thank you so much to the speakers.